Please welcome Program Committee Chair Jacqui Hoover as she talks story with Shelee, Kimura and Alicia Moy on their visions, opportunities and challenges in the energy industry.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the second day of the Hawaii Energy Conference. And before we get started with these two distinguished guests this morning, we wanted to have a little bit of a recap of what happened yesterday. And I've invited Shelee Kimura to help me with doing that. And so, Shelee, you were here to hear Daphne Frias speak and so forth. And I'm wondering what your insights and comments are. Some of the people may not have been here yesterday, but just wanted to share and also recap for those who were here. For those of you who were not here, our keynote speaker is a climate change advocate, an activist, as well as a disabled individual who is an activist for her community. And she says she would like us to speak the language of the disabled and recognize and acknowledge that those with disabilities are also challenged by climate change and the changes that we're trying to make in the energy sector. This inspiring young woman is wheelchair bound. She also just recently got over a bout with cancer and simultaneously is in third year of medical school, while simultaneously also studying for her master's in public health. So if you have not seen her speak, or if you heard her speak and are inspired and would like to see her again, we'll be having access to the recording of this conference within a few weeks, and you'll all get a link to that. So Shelee, I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so just personally, I thought Daphne was inspiring. And I think many of you are also moved by her story and just her, I think someone had commented in the comments, and it was read out for all of us to hear, that she just embodied aloha. And she's not from Hawaii, but she embodied aloha. She presented with grace and joy, despite all the challenges and what's in front of us from the perspective of her representing both youth and disabled people and climate change and what that means. Despite all those challenges, she presented with aloha and boldness, but yet joy at the same time. And that was just really inspiring. And when you listen to her, you just feel like, you know what, guys, we can do this. I mean, look at her and look at who we are doing this for. She's representing the youth of tomorrow and the leaders of tomorrow. And we think about our own children and the work that we're doing. It's so important. And I think the other point that was made was that our children are feeling like this burden that has been created by society is being put upon them. And there's many of us talking about how we're gonna battle climate change and all the things we're gonna do, but yet we're not sufficiently including the voices of youth who are gonna inherit this to take on. And I think that's a really important point. One of the more tactical things she talked about was mentoring. I kind of call it peer mentoring because it goes both ways, right? The mentoring of youth to us older folks, at the same time, us older folks mentoring youth, and that two-way learning that we can have from each other to just be more inclusive in the way that we're thinking. The other thing I took away from her was she talked about your path is your path, and you're the only one that has it, and your path is your power. And I thought that was very powerful as well. And when I bring that back to Hawaii, Hawaii is very unique. And our paths in Hawaii are very unique. And each individual in Hawaii's path is unique. But when you bring all of our paths together, collectively, we have a very unique collective path. And that collective path is our power to get things done as well. So I really appreciated her talk. The importance of all voices being included, and we need to bring all communities to the table to have these discussions and make sure we don't leave anybody behind, and they're part of the solutions as well.
Thank you, Shelee. And just to recap the rest of the day, that led us to so many conversations about the need for engagement, the need for empowerment of our communities. And Daphne represented several communities, obviously the disabled and youth community, but also the community of those who really are trying and want to get involved. And with a little bit of collaboration and connection, they're able to make things happen. So yesterday, one of the first things that comes to mind that we did yesterday that we have not done in years past and which we hope we'll be able to do moving forward, we had a speaker from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We all recognize that we need electrical engineers and senior management. We need to start looking at things holistically and recognize that we also need other skill sets and trades involved. And I think that is the true message of this conference this year, is how are we looking at it holistically? How are all of you in the audience connecting with each other, with those who are speaking, with those who are sharing their ideas and so forth? We had a good conversation, robust conversation with permitting agencies and listen to them speak alongside a developer of projects, just like some of you in the audience. And it was interesting to hear those new perspectives and to hear things such as mutual accountability. What do we need to do to help those we need assistance from to help us? And rather than it being a we versus them, how do we make this sector we working with each other? So I thought that would be a good place to kick off today's conversation. We've got the privilege of having two very distinguished individuals with us today. You just heard from one, Shelee Kimura, President and CEO of Hawaiian Electric, and we're also great and very happy to welcome Alicia Moy. And rather than me doing their bios, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves for those of you who are not as familiar with both of them as I have the privilege of being. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqui. I guess I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Moy. I'm the CEO of Hawaii Gas. Thanks for having me and inviting me here to speak today. I'm very privileged to be with you all, very much the energy experts in Hawaii. I feel like this is like a 10-year class reunion for everybody. So nice to see everybody. This is actually my 10-year anniversary as president and CEO of the company, and so much has changed for us as a company. Certainly when I started, we were a much different organization from when I began. When we were preparing for this session too, just thinking about how we were focused on LNG as a potential pathway to meet our goals. And now we know that that's not part of the transition. So for us, as a company, we've been really focused on how we pivot, how do we meet our climate goals as a state. And for us, it's about then decarbonizing our fuel source, focusing on renewable natural gas and hydrogen. So I know we'll be hearing more about that later today. But yeah, so I'm happy to be here. I'm a mom of 4 boys. That's also what's changed in 10 years. So very focused on the next generation and making sure that I'm someone that they're proud of growing up. And when I go to their classrooms to speak about what I do, that they can be proud of their mom and for what I'm achieving for them and their future.
So I'll build off of that. So I love that. I'm mom of 3. Mine are much older. 1 boy, 2 girls. One's in college, one's graduating, one's in high school. And we're talking about our youth, and they're a big part of my journey. For any parent, they're a big part of your journey, your path, right? And a lot of the things we do as a company, my children embody for me what we're trying to do for the next generation. And when I hear my daughter say that she and her friends talk about not having children because of where they think the world's going, that breaks my heart. And you read articles about the stress that children are going through, young adults and teenagers are going through. And greater than 50% of them believe that we're not going to be able to solve this crisis. And I think that's something we all have to carry very heavily in the work that we do. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I'm building off of the children aspect. And I think that kind of grounds all of us. And I think when we talk about the work that we do here, the work that we're doing in energy, the work that we're doing for Hawaii, it's not just about the next project. It's not just about the next year's results. We're talking about how that fits into the generational change that we're trying to create. And that if we can do that here, then others will be able to see that it can be done elsewhere. So that wasn't much of an introduction, but just going with the flow on the conversation.
Actually, I think that was a perfect introduction because you mentioned crisis, and having this holistic energy conference and the discussions that we have been having both inside this auditorium as well as outside, and today's conversations, and hopefully the conversations that we take away with us from this conference. One of the things that just caught my attention is you mentioned crisis. And with having the conversations that we are having over yesterday and today, I'm hoping that we'll also be able to identify the difference and discern what is a manufactured crisis versus a true crisis, and what should we really be spending our time and attention on. So a lot of the, for lack of a better word, manufactured crises that I see we're moving towards resolving with some of the conversations we have had include engaging the community. The community is not the opponent, not the enemy. The community is who we're working with and for. Working with all members of our energy sector, not just the policymakers, not just the engineers and the planners, but also the boots on the ground. In years past, some of you will recall, we had Richard Ha here one year, and he always talks about something that I carry with me, and he says, Jacqui, when you go to talk to people, make sure that you're talking not just to the shiny shoes and the high heels. Make sure you're talking to the working boots and the rubber slippers too, because they live in our community as well. So with that in mind, one of the, perhaps I'm making too much of this, but a perceived manufactured crisis is Hawaiian Electric versus Hawaii Gas. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to have the two of you up here, is to reinforce that conversation that it doesn't always end up being either or. It's, if we're fortunate, we make it a conversation that is and. And with that, I'd really like you guys to just talk story and, as Shelee says, riff off of each other. Thank you.
I started already. You want me to start? Okay. So Alicia and I have known each other since, well, became friends in 2016, 2017. We were in the Omidyar Fellows together and got to know each other on a very personal basis outside of our roles at Hawaii Gas and Hawaiian Electric. And I think that was probably designed by the Omidyar people that select the groups. But as Alicia said, we're in a very different place than we were 10 years ago. I think sometimes, kind of like how media manufactures opponents, I think the conversation in our communities just creates a greater divide than there is oftentimes. And I think all of I like to call it an ecosystem of energy in Hawaii, because that indicates that we're a system. We're all interdependent on each other, and we each have a part. And if I reflect back on when I started at Hawaiian Electric Company 9 years ago, which is just almost a decade ago, I felt like everybody was looking at, or from where I sat, it felt like everybody was looking at us as an opponent. And we were at opposite sides of the table, staring each other down. And that felt not very productive. And I feel like there's been a big shift where we now all stand on the same side, looking out at the horizon, saying, okay, this is the destination we want to get to. We may not all yet agree on the exact path and all the specifics of it, but we're looking at each other saying, okay, what are the solutions to get to that path? And so we're all in different places on that path, but we're trying to bring each other along so we can all get there, because all of us getting there means Hawaii's going to get there. And so Hawaii Gas they just filed, and I won't get into your plans, but they just filed their long-term plans, which is intended to help all of us get there. And we're all going to find our own solutions, and the hope is that they all start to integrate over time.
And just thinking back when Shelee and I were getting to know each other, I mean, one of the things we first bonded over, besides personal stuff, was around the focus on that in Hawaii, the energy system is so connected that we need to be looking at it from a system-wide perspective, that when you start pulling on one sector and making mandates or regulations or things like that affect it, it's going to have follow-on impacts to other things, like, for instance, the refinery. So there's a lot of different pieces to this, and so I think it's very exciting to be on the stage with Shelee and in her new role, because I do feel that there's been a shift. Historically, there was a lot of competition. There was that feeling there. So I would not be authentic to you all today to say that didn't exist. But now I definitely feel a different shift. I feel like we've looked at our past. We're a over 100-year-old company in Hawaii. We've been really thinking about who we are and what we are and what we're going to be for the future. We know that we are not, I think we have played an outsized role here in Hawaii, but we're not that big of a company. We are 360 employees. We make up 2% of Hawaii's energy market, 2% of the Hawaii's energy market. So we are not a huge organization, but I think we play a really critical role, especially in times of needing to have energy diversity. And when we think we have hurricane season coming up, our company is there when, or if, hopefully never, but if we need to have island recovery, like, we're going to be there and part of the solution. So I think going forward, it's really thinking about how we can work together in new ways, new partnerships, innovative partnerships, and I'm really excited for the future, actually, and what's to come. So,
yesterday, I totally agree with that. And yesterday, I introduced the concept of economy-wide decarbonization and how every single sector is going to need to be a part of that. And I think it's exciting if we all adopt the 2030 goal and aspiration to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% as an economy, and then 70% from an electricity standpoint, and then what role that Hawaii Gas may play in that. And many of you may have seen our announcement for firm generation. Today, Colton and the decarbonization team, they may talk about the need for carbon-free fuels. And I think that's a place where Hawaii Gas is exploring in and looking at for longer term. And so these things are going to evolve over time. I talked about this decade being the decade of action. The challenge for us is, all of us, is to act and execute in this decade while we continue to innovate. And we need both of those things happening at the same time. Even in our company, we try and do both of those things at the same time, and it's not easy. But someone yesterday talked about being on the treadmill. You wish you could just kind of stop the treadmill and then restart it again. We all know we don't have that luxury. So we're running, all of us are running on that current treadmill while we're trying to design the new treadmill that we can jump onto next, and then we'll create the next treadmill, the next treadmill. But I think that's what all of us are doing as we try and execute on our plans.
And I think, Jacqui, you were saying, and I love how the conferences bring in new players to speak, like IBW, like, that is fantastic. I think, we are moving so fast, we have lots of goals we're trying to achieve, but if we don't bring our employees with us, the people that live here, the people that actually deliver the energy to you in your homes, they need to be along in the journey with us, and that is actually part of the challenge, but also the opportunity. So we want to make sure we are transparent with our employees and where we're headed, and that they do have jobs with us for the future. I mean, that is something that is really weighing on their minds as we talk about this transition. I remember being at a hearing at the city and county, and someone was just riffing, just saying whatever they wanted, and saying we're going to be, out of jobs, and just like the coal plant, and just really rude. And all of our employees wearing their blue suits were sitting there in the audience, and it just really takes a toll. We are a small community, and as our company continues to transition, we will have jobs for our employees. We are working on renewable natural gas. We are working on hydrogen. We already have hydrogen blend in our pipeline now, more than any other gas utility on the mainland or that we know of. So we're going to continue to focus on that, an opportunity for decarbonizing fuels and new sectors. So I think that's something that is a challenge, but look to all of us to understand that there is a role for organizations to play, and to be respectful to employees and allow them to go on this transition with us.
Perfect. And one of the things that I'm hearing both of you speak to is something that really resonates with me. I just had a conversation a few days before the conference with someone who was talking about competition, and the more he spoke, the more I realized that he was coming from a place of fear and not knowing what was happening and being a little bit concerned about it. And I said at the time, your word is competition. Your comp word apparently is competition. My comp word is complementary, not in terms of flattery, but how do we identify and discern what's missing in our companies or in our projects, in our goals and initiatives, in our policies that can be supported and have filled by our neighbor and the company next door, the company down the street, and so forth. And so I'd like to ask you if you could talk a little bit about some of the things where you complement each other. Again, not flattery. I know you guys are good friends, but and also, before I turn the mic over to them, please, audience, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, put it in your app, and we'll make sure we integrate those into the conversation.
Well, Shelee did send me the new press release for the Waiau plant and how they're converting it, and the potential for a renewable hydrogen, which is pretty exciting. I mean, that is definitely a pathway that we're looking at as part of our solution. So definitely opportunities there to work together. I think just, speaking with Shelee just off the cuff too, just thinking about, workforce challenges and things like that, sharing, best practices, it's also helpful. We're kind of going through similar situations and have similar challenges. And so just that collaboration too, I think is fantastic.
Yep, I just echo that. As we were preparing, we don't see each other as often as we would like, but as we were preparing for this panel, we could have talked for a very long time, because a lot of the challenges we're each facing, we saw there was a lot of commonality. And in any case, we can all learn from each other. Going back to, we all have our own paths, and everybody's path, there's something to learn from that we can learn from each other as well.
Perfect. And one of the things that I've been talking to legislators about as they ask you, and they always do at the end of session, well, what did you think of the session? How did it go? And recognizing that we have to work with them moving forward, I tend to be honest, but also, and filter some of what I have to say, but really wanted to give them what I personally saw this year. And Shelee mentioned paths. What I saw is everyone is tending to stay in their lane, and we're all driving parallel to each other, but not really recognizing that these lanes intersect, and it's at those points of intersection where we need to make sure we're not creating a vehicular crash and so forth. So where do you see some of the pinch points being in the energy sector at large, not specifically knowing that there are some proprietary information that you guys need to keep. But are there any pinch points that you would like to share with the audience that we think we can address?
Well, the top one I sort of touched on, which is definitely the workforce, which I think we're both feeling it in different ways. For us, it goes. We have job positions, we have job openings we have 4 great clean, shameless plug, 4 great clean energy positions for a new department we're setting up. Please go to hawaiigas.com/careers if you're interested. But seriously, we do have a lot of really good positions, but it's challenging to find that skill set that we need. No gas company has ever done this before. So trying to find that skill set to join us to drive our action plans forward. Shelee mentioned our integrated resource plan. We have a set path that we're trying to follow. We have specific actions that we need to start this year that we've already started, but we need people to come and carry it and execute that for us and do it really well, because failure is not an option. We have to make this happen. And so workforce and continuing to look at just our service people, the delivery guys, CDL drivers, it is really becoming more and more a challenge, and I hear that from many different businesses in Hawaii as well, just the lack of the various workers.
Yep, echoing the workforce challenge. Some of you may be aware, but we have our linemen being recruited to California, and they're being offered 20% higher pay, signing bonuses, housing allowances, and we all know when we look at the macro statistics for Hawaii, we're seeing population declines because people are leaving Hawaii. They can't afford to live in Hawaii and getting priced out. Housing is another big factor there, and I'm really happy the governor made that a priority because I do think that's a barrier to us getting the workforce that we need. So that's one topic. It's also developing the workforce and us collectively identifying, because we are all looking for many of the same skill sets and the same needs, whether it's engineering or cybersecurity or our frontline employees, and developing those skill sets and working together to create that ecosystem. Even though they may not come to our company, if we have that ecosystem of skilled labor and professionals, that just helps our entire ecosystem.
This is great. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, because I think it points out how we're all connected. So Shelee just pointed out the fact that her linesmen are being recruited to the mainland, and that is, in itself, you just think, oh, that's too bad. But then when you think about the follow-on impact of that, that's going to impact other companies in Hawaii. So we've already lost one of our plant workers to one of HIEDB's plants, and that's just naturally going to happen. People are shifting and moving all around, but that's the challenge. It creates this snowball effect that's not good for Hawaii when this sort of thing happens. So we really need to start really focusing, and I know there's been a lot of work done already, and there's going to continue to be more work, but we really need to accelerate that as well, just as much as we're accelerating all of our other plans. Great.
So as I'm listening to both of you speak, and you've both brought up children, the current conditions, and so forth, some of the challenges, especially related to workforce. And it calls to mind something else that I shared with legislature, that I feel that there are very few people, a small critical mass in Hawaii, that's looking at the true future. We certainly have people looking at today and tomorrow, but we have fewer people looking at yesterday, today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. And I always think about Hawaii Gas and your founders. How smart were they to call it Hawaii Gas, not, Hawaii Propane or something like that, because now we're moving into hydrogen and new gases and so forth. So they clearly had a vision for the day after tomorrow, whether they knew it or not. But as you think about this, and I want to commend everybody in this audience, because I truly believe that the energy sector is one of the few sectors looking at the day after tomorrow, looking at things holistically, recognizing that what we do and decide really impacts everything and everyone in our community. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Do you see any, because you both just recently submitted your integrated plans and so forth, and I'm wondering if from that there's something you can tease out that would really send a message to our community, our energy sector community, as to what and where we are going to be the day after tomorrow.
So
We didn't rehearse, as you can tell.
I was just thinking about your comment about Hawaii Gas's name, and I was like, some people actually think we sell gasoline, so it's not so, but thank you.
So when we look at our plans, we're looking out to 2045. So infrastructure is a long-term business, and we have to look long-term. So we can't just look at tomorrow. And we have to look at every step we take in the context of that longer term. But we can't wait for what might come next. And I think that's something that we can tend to do. Like, what's going to come next? Maybe we should wait for the next best thing to come. Let's wait for the next best thing. But that's like waiting for the new iPhone, right? I mean, you're always going to have a new iPhone, but that doesn't mean that you don't buy the next iPhone. And you're not going to buy every single one, but that's why we have to be smart. It's like dollar cost averaging, right? We're going to keep investing in our infrastructure to transform it over time, and we're going to bring in those new technologies, those new innovations as we go, but we can't be paralyzed from moving forward. And while I have the mic, I also just want to make sure everybody knows, when I talked about the announcement of our Waiau power plant, that's going to be bid into the RFP, or has been bid into the RFP. So it's not a sure thing that's happening. The reason why we announced it is because the community engagement and transparency that we talked about earlier is part of our value set, and we wanted to get that out sooner than later to start talking to community about it. But firm generation as a whole is going to be one of those challenges. We have been talking about renewable energy in the context of solar and wind and storage for a very long time, and those are going to be the critical components of our energy system in the future, along with other technologies that are going to come along. But what we need right now in this transition is the reliability of our system to make sure that the lights stay on 24/7, 365 days of the year as we reach these critical points of variable renewable generation. So we need that firm generation to fill those gaps when the solar and wind and storage aren't sufficient for any period of time. And it's also a resiliency question. We want to have that diversity in the generation that we have. And we take a look at what's happening in Guam right now. It's a really good reminder of what can happen to Hawaii. And we're even more isolated than Guam. And we need to make sure that we have a diverse set of resources which minimizes and reduces our risk as well.
And for those of you who have been so focused on the energy crisis that you haven't been seeing the news or the weather, what Shelee was referring to is a storm that hit Guam. And as of this morning when I checked, they were about 98% without power. They've lost 98% of their power. So I'm guessing the 2% they have is probably the military and their critical infrastructure such as hospitals.
Just thinking about, the day after tomorrow question, we have been so focused on our integrated resource plan, working through what are those near-term, medium-term actions we need to take now, but we also need to be, like you said, focusing on that. And we have new owners through this 10-year time period. We've also gone through a sale process, and now we have new owners, Argo Infrastructure Partners, who are really progressive, focused on ESG issues. They've got pension funds that are behind them. And so they're really supportive of our energy transition as well. We are having a session coming up in a couple of weeks, actually, really just to take a step back and have some blue sky thinking, and something that we've been wanting to do, but we've been so heads down, And now it's time to really think about that long view and in the future, and really have also just the buy-in from our new owners and their support going forward. And I think a few of you are coming to speak to them as well, and thank you again for the time, again, trying to bring in the community as well so they can understand, you know, our host culture and the energy environment here and how unique and exciting it is. But that's what we're thinking about. So I don't have an answer yet, but we are working through like those blue sky ideas. So if you have any ideas, we're open to your thoughts too. Thanks.
Well, I think one of the things we all in this room can be proud of ourselves for is Hawaii certainly is leading the charge with respect to clean energy, renewable energy, looking at how do we ensure reliability and resiliency and so forth. And with that in mind, both of you represent groups, and not just your companies, but wider groups in our community who are the trendsetters and the people who are identifying and connecting the dots between yesterday, today, tomorrow, the technologies and so forth. Do either of you have a story to share about trend setting within your company? Because that innovation, I think, is the stuff that, you know, is inspiring to the rest of us in the community.
So Alicia and I talked a little bit about this earlier as well, that we come to a conference like this and the things that we're doing, everybody goes, oh, okay, yeah, we've been doing that for a long time. That's nice. But we go to conferences on the mainland and folks are looking at us as pioneers and they're like, wow, you guys have gotten that far with that. Or on the technical side, Colton's always being asked to speak at different conferences, and people are very interested in the pioneering work that we're doing to integrate the level of rooftop solar and battery storage that we have done already. And in addition, the utility scale variable resources that we are and will be integrating, and the path and the models that we're using and the technologies that we're using to determine where we're going to go, but also how to operate the system in a way that no one else has really done yet on a grid like ours. And I think we all have to remember that Hawaii is very different than California, because California they have safety nets upon safety nets that we don't have because they're part of the Continental U.S. And they have neighbors that they can rely on. They have better access to resources and labor and all of that if there's a storm. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We're not even interconnected amongst our islands. So every island is dependent on each other, and we don't have that same margin for error that others have. So everybody's looking at Hawaii like this microcosm of innovation, not only on the technical side, but also on this work that we're doing together, on the community side, on the policy side, on how we work together to get these things done, because that actually is a barrier that others are starting to face on the mainland.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking the whole world is trying to catch up to what we're already doing from the community perspective and also the energy perspective. So for Hawaii Gas, I think the parallel to what Shelee was talking about is the work that we've been doing with hydrogen. And we've had hydrogen blending in our pipeline since the 70s. During COVID, all of a sudden hydrogen became the topic of the day again, and everyone always says, oh, hydrogen's just 5 years out, it's 5 years out. But now there's tons of money being thrown at it, lots of innovation around it as a clean fuel. And we're being looked at, and we've been talking to many other companies about the experience that we have with blending hydrogen within our pipelines now. We have averaging about 12%, but we've seen up to 15% blending within our pipeline. And I guess the equivalent to Colton would be our VP of Operations, Kevin Nishimura, who's getting his dance cards full. He's doing tons of conference panels, webinars. We're calling him Mr. Hydrogen. He's thinking of changing his name to Kevin with 2 H's. Doesn't have H in his name. So we're really excited about this and of what we can provide and the information we can provide to help the whole industry move forward, and for ourselves too. And you'll hear later in the panel that Julie Junker's moderating, but there's a pilot that we've been doing with Oceanit, basically to, in terms of innovation, like is a new type of coating that we're testing with them, that if that works how we want it to work or how they want it to work, we can actually increase the amount of hydrogen blending within the pipeline. And so that's pretty exciting, and lots of what we were talking about before in terms of innovative partnerships.
Thank you. So in Shelley's opening remarks, she talked about a comment that was made by someone in the audience speaking to how Daphne is not from Hawaii, and yet she spoke with and she behaves with and lives her life with aloha. And so a few years ago, I had to get some federal funding, and the argument I used was, unlike California that you used, we don't get to pull an extension cord from someplace else. And so we really do need the support to be, innovative and so forth. But where I was going with this, Shelee mentioned the safety nets, just as I did with the extension cord. And one of the safety nets that we've seen, for example, on Hawaii Island, when we had that horrible storm where the albizia trees came down and so forth, we saw linemen from other jurisdictions show up, not just Hawaiian Electric linemen, but KIUC sent some folks. There were people that came from the Continental U.S. and so forth. And you expect that. You expect within the same industry and company, like missions and so forth, they would share. But we also saw people from this audience, as an example, who aren't directly tied into that, but saw the need for making sure that our power was restored and there was this reliability and so forth. And I'm wondering, how important is it to you, looking through the community perspective, for that reliability and that resilience? How important is that to our sector overall and also our future overall?
And that's everything. I mean, that's what you all depend upon us for, is to be there for you when you need us the most. So that's what we plan for, making sure our infrastructure is resilient, that we are reliable, that we're set up the right way, so that no matter what, we can provide you the energy when you need it, and when the islands need it, and when the community needs it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I completely agree with that. And it's not just natural disasters that we have to worry about now, right? It's cybersecurity, it's physical security threats, and because of the concentration of Department of Defense in Hawaii, it's even a national security concern. And so when we look at our responsibilities in terms of critical infrastructure in Hawaii and all the other critical services and essential services that depend on us, the resilience and the reliability of our systems and the safety is our highest priority.
Great. And I brought that up because we have a tendency as the human species to look at you to take care of it. So we look at the utilities to take care of certain things, and we depend on you for our security blanket. As long as the lights are on and we've got hot water and whatnot, we can use our microwave, we feel comfortable. But I wanted to go back to something that Zendo Kern and I spoke about during the panel yesterday, about mutual and shared accountability. And I'm wondering if there's anything you would like to share with the audience about how they can help the utilities help themselves and help our community.
Can I just riff off of that question plus the last question you just talked about? Because you talked about how lots of people came together to help in that situation. And when we were doing some resilience work with others, it was pre-COVID, so maybe 4 years ago, one of the things that we learned is that communities are able to recover, the communities that are able to recover most quickly after a natural disaster are those that have the greatest community cohesion. And so while we take responsibility for the infrastructure that we have, there's a lot of on-the-ground work that's going to happen after disaster. So it's the clearing of roads, it's the clearing of trees. We need to get to our assets in order to repair them. And when the community rallies around this, that's when we can all recover quickly. But that's just a small example. There's, as we talked about before, it's an entire ecosystem. And so everybody doing their part in a situation like that is so critical. And that's an emergency situation. If we take our path to 100% renewables, if we look at 2030 and we say, okay, we want to decarbonize by 70%, and we look at that with the same kind of urgency, then the same thing applies. I mean, we all have our part to do there, and there's a list of things that I think we can all do, but I think if we first embrace the idea that we all have kuleana to make that happen, and that doing nothing is actually doing something that's going to prevent us from getting there, that's an important thing to recognize and understand. And the Powering Past Coal Task Force is a good example of many different parties who play a part in getting renewable projects done, coming together. And thank you to Governor Ige for pulling that together over the last couple of years. But that was a really good example of all the parties who touch getting projects done, being together so we could look at the end-to-end process and everybody being held accountable along the way to get their part done, and the baton being passed smoothly to the next person to get their job done.
Great. So we're getting the time's up signal, and there's a break after this, but I wanted to give Alicia a moment to close.
Really short. I echo a lot of what Shelee says and agree with it. I think we're in a new paradigm now. I think we'll all agree there's a shift in the energy sector. There's a shift in leadership. There's just a shift. So definitely we're in a new paradigm at this point, and it's going to take a lot of us thinking through innovative partnerships. And I think at our organization, what we've been working through, because we're all kind of being tested in new ways, it's really to think about what the other person is doing and just assume best intentions. I think that's really hard for us to do if we want to, as we're working day to day. But I think it is a new paradigm where I think if we come at problems from that perspective, assuming that other person has the best intentions, then perhaps new opportunities will open for all of us. And so that's what I'm pretty excited about for the future.
Great, thank you. Could you please join me in thanking our esteemed speakers? And as you can see, they're both very approachable, and they'll be here today. If you have any questions or comments, please see them personally. Thank you.